So you've got lots of pieces and scraps now that are too dry, and you need to start to figure out how you're going to recycle your clay. I'm going to show you how. What you're going to need is a bin to put your dry pieces in, or your pieces in so that they can dry, and then you'll then cover with water. And you'll need a place to dry your clay. So whether or not you have a plaster board, you can use your drywall, but it will be a while before you can use it again, or any porous surface like plywood, or you can put a old tablecloth or canvas, something on a table to use. It just will take the clay at least a couple days to dry. So you've got these little pieces. What you want to do is break them up into as small pieces as you can. If you've got some old coils, they're probably going to be thin enough, but it doesn't hurt to just rip them up a little bit more. The smaller the pieces are, the faster they're going to dry. Same with little other scraps, old pinch pots, same deal. Break it up a little bit. Slabs, why not? They probably would be fine too, but it doesn't hurt to rip it up. What you want to avoid are big chunks. These chunks will not dry very well. They're going to be really hard to rehydrate. So you want to break them up as much as you can. If they get bone dry like this, you have a tool to use. It's called a hammer. Break it up as much as you can. Or a block, or anything. Break it up. Just break it up as much as you can. Put it in this bin. And then what you're going to do is wait for all of your pieces getting bone dry. That depends how big your pieces are, but you want to wait until it's all bone dry, which means it will go from this to this if it's speckled clay. If it's white clay, it'll go from gray to pretty much white. You'll be able to tell. All right, then I'll be right back. So I've got all of my clay dried out here. It's pretty much all nice and bone dry. I've got this low, wide bowl to put it in. You don't need something low and wide. It can be taller and skinnier. I'm just going to do it this way so you can really see the process more. So make sure everything's bone dry. And then I've got some water. I'm just going to pour enough water in to cover my clay. Just like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to really not touch this until all of the bone dry pieces have slacked down. It doesn't really take too long. Maybe if your pieces are totally bone dry and you've got them covered, 15, 20 minutes. So we're gonna let this sit and check back in a little bit. So I've left this sit for about an hour, and most of it is pretty soft now. There might be some little chunks, but I can probably squeeze them out. There's no reason why you shouldn't let this sit overnight. The longer you sit, it sits, the easier it's gonna be to work with. You can kind of see I still have some little chunks in there that for this process, I'm gonna get rid of those little chunks. But let it sit overnight. All of that will get totally rehydrated, and you can kind of see it really breaks down that clay into pretty much mush. So that's exactly what we're gonna wanna do. If you leave it out and there's a lot of standing water at the top, that's great. Just take that standing water, pour it off, or scoop it out with a rib or something like that. So then what we're gonna do is we're gonna squish all this up and then lay it out on a board, and I'm gonna show you that now. So we have this amazing wedging table to use to dry our clay, which is just plaster. But you can use any porous surface. So that can be plywood, that can be canvas covered table, that can be a wooden board, that can be your drywall board. You just want it to be porous. That way the material will take the water out from the clay, both air drying and pulling it out of the surface. That same kind of material is what you're going to want to wedge it on when this all dries. So I'm going to put this out on this table and then let it sit and dry. It's going to be some time, at least a day, but I'll tell you once I know. So what I'm going to do is get in here and try to squish out any big chunks. If I have any hard pieces, I'm not going to put those in with the rest of my clay. I'm going to kind of put them off to the side and keep rehydrating those. All the other stuff, the really gooey stuff, I'm just going to set out and let dry there. If I feel a chunk, I'm going to pull it away. That chunk won't rehydrate well. Some people like to really blend this up too. So if you have a drill mixer, great. Use a drill mixer, really blend all that up. You shouldn't need to though. You should be able to just kind of squish out all this clay and put it out on the table here. You don't want any extra water, so as much of the water as you can get off, that's great. So like I said before, you can pan some water off the top, dump out the extra water, and then mix it up. But really we're just going to set this out to dry. And you might be asking, what are we going to do to get this back to a workable clay state? The answer is wedge. We're going to wedge it all together. There's some tricks, like I like to cut the clay together, which I'll show, but in general, it's just going to be wedging. All right. So like I said, I still had some chunks. I didn't leave mine to dry very long, just an hour. So you might as well let it dry overnight, and that'll be good. If you have small pieces, it can be as little as 15 minutes to 20 minutes. But because we had some bigger chunks, it's going to take a little bit longer. So we're just going to let that clay sit there for probably 24 to 48 hours, and then we'll wedge it up. Because this was a relatively small amount of clay, in 24 hours when I went to check, the clay seemed great. It was still a little tacky, but not gooey or wet, so I could just roll it up, and then I'm going to just start wedging it here. If you want a more thorough video on wedging, check out the one dedicated to it right here on our drive. Another thing you might want to do is just squish out the clay and check to see if there's any lumps. I forgot to do that right at first, so I did it kind of there in the middle. But everything should come together nice and easy. If the clay you put out was not chunky, it shouldn't be when you're all done. And then the last thing that you want to do is just clean up your board so that the next time that you recycle clay, if it's a different color, you're ready to go. So I'm just going to scrape this down with a rib because we're working on a plaster bat. We're going to throw out all that clay that we scrape up, and then I'm just going to wash it down. It only took us 24 hours because the clay was a relatively small amount, and we're also using this plaster board. So if it takes you a little bit longer, don't worry about it. Just keep checking the clay until it's ready to wedge. And then that's it. Good luck, y'all.